All right. It's time to make sure that we're taping. All right, we're all set to begin. Act 2, Scene 3. I'll lead off and pass it on to Jerry. It's on page 43. The gray-eyed morn smiles on the frowning night, checkering the eastern clouds with streaks of light, and flecked darkness like drunken reels from fourth day's path and Titan's burning wheels. Now ere the sun advance his burning eye, the day to cheer and night's dank dew to dry, I must upfill this austere cage of ours with baleful weeds and precious juiced flowers. The earth that's nature's mother is her tomb. What is her burying grave? That is her womb, and from her womb the diverse kind we sucking on her natural bosom find. Many for many virtues excellent, none but for some, and yet all different. O mickle is the powerful grace that lies in plants, herbs, stones, and their true qualities. For naught so vile that on the earth doth live, but to the earth some special good doth give. Nor aught so good, but strained from that fair use, revolts from true birth, stumbling on abuse. Virtue itself turns vice by being misapplied, and vice sometime by action dignified. Within the infant rind of this weak flower, poison has residence and medicine power. For this being smelt, with that part cheers each other part. Being tasted stays all the senses with the heart. Two such opposing kings encamp them still in man as well as herbs, grace and rude will, and where the worser is predominant, full soon the canker death eats up that plant. Whoa, what a mouthful.
What early tongue so sweet saluteth me? Young son, it argues a distempered head, so soon to bid good morrow to thy bed. Care keeps his watch on every old man's eye, and where care lodges, sleep will never fly. But where unbruised youth with unstuffed brain doth couch his limbs, their golden sleep doth reign. Therefore thy earliness doth ensure thou art aroused with some distemperature. Or if not so, then here I hit it right, our Romeo hath not been in bed tonight. This last is true, Caesar rest with mine.
That part said, waste thou with Rosaline?
With Rosaline, my ghostly father, no. I have forgotten that name, and that name's woe.
That's my good son. The fair hair's about anywhere.
Tell me ere thou ask me again. I have been feasting with mine enemy. God a sudden one hath wounded me. I be wounded. All thy remedies and in thy help at holy physic lie. There no hatredness man alone, my intercession likewise send my hope.
Be fain, good son, and holy in thy good. Riddling confession finds but riddling shrift.
Then plainly know my heart's dear love is set on the fair daughter of rich Capulet. As mine on hers, so hers is set on mine, and all combined save what thou must combine by holy marriage. When and where and how we met, we wooed, and made exchange of vow, I'll tell thee as we pass. But this I pray, that thou consent to marry us today.
Holy Saint Francis, what a change is here. Is Rosaline that thou didst love so dear, so soon forgotten or forsaken? Young men's love then lies not truly in their hearts, but in their eyes. Jesu Marie, what a deal of rhyme has the watch price. Sallow cheeks for Rosaline. How much salt tears. Lo here thy cheek, thy stain doth sit, of old tear that is not washed yet off yet. If ever thou wast thyself and with woes, and these woes thine, thou and these woes were all for thine. And art thou changed? And art thou changed? Pronounce this sentence then. Woman may fall when there is no strength in them.
I'll try to smooth off for loving Roseanne. For doing not, beloved, keep in mind.
And haste me very loud.
Loving the grave, filling one in another half.
I pray thee, chide me not. Her I love now, but grace for grace, and lost for love allow. Others did not so.
Oh, she knew well my love did read my woes. Come, good waverer, come go with me. Unrespect how thy assistant be. This alliance may so happy prove, burden your household rancour, keep your love.
Oh, let us hence, I stand on sudden haste.
Wisely and slow they stumble that run fast. It's actually a spiritual maxim there. Fast is slow and slow is fast. All right. Let's go right to that first magnificent speech of Friar Lawrence. It's very, very beautiful. And it's also worthy of quite a bit of study. Shakespeare does some pretty interesting and subtle and new things in this passage. First, he chooses his monk to be a Franciscan. And the Franciscans were not elitists, and they were not overly churchy, even though they were very humble and very Christ-oriented. The Franciscans were more active in England than a lot of the other orders, and they were quite liberal in their outlooks, in their culture and everything else, even in spite of their extreme views of poverty and dedication to Christ. Shakespeare had a lot of difficulty with different orders of monks. He was extremely hard on the political and dishonest Jesuits. In King John, there's a section in there where he delineates the doctrine of equivocation, which the Jesuits did because they did everything to advance the power of the papacy. They would, for example, if there was a dispute between England and France, they would go to the King of England and say, what will you offer the Pope to have the dispute settled your way? And the king would make an offer, and they'd go to the King of France and say, well, the King of England has bid this much. If you give more, we'll turn it your way. And then they would go to Rome, and they would tell the King of England that they had another revelation in between the time that it was. So it's called the doctrine of equivocation. Now, the liberality is surprising in here. For one, we find a Catholic monk alluding to Titans from Greek mythology. And that was a no-no if the order wasn't liberal. So it is really subtle how he's making his point here. He also propounds a philosophy on lines 9, 10, and going on to lines 12 that is only to be found in the mysteries. He differentiates between the earth and nature. Normally, Mother Earth and Mother Nature are inseparable. They're usually carelessly considered as one. Without going into technical terms, in one line, he presents the mystery's view of Earth as an unconditioned macrocosm, a realm in which evolution of various kinds can take place. And those disparate manifestations he sees as nature. So the realm is different from the forms that are developed in that realm and evolution that takes place in that realm. And it's really neat that he can say that and say it in one sentence. In mysticism, all realms, the physical realm, the etheric realm, the desire world, the world of thought, all of them are considered unconditioned macrocosms. They are like the different bodies of the universal spirit. And in them, the different creative hierarchies and the different creatures live. And it's in that they have their being and their existence. Some even maintain that this is the only way that the universal spirit can maintain its universality. That is by producing an unconditioned state of being. It doesn't become personally involved, and it can be totally and exclusively universal in its spiritual nature. I thought it was an interesting thing. Another thing, Friar Lawrence is obviously an herbalist. But he's much more than that, and he is an herbalist in a very different way from most herbalists. He has this view of polarity and the cycles that come out of polarity, so that the earth is both a womb and a tomb, and that all the cycles take place as an ongoing process between those two poles of the same thing. Now in this passage, Shakespeare, though he did know it, and it's shown in other places, he does not propound the doctrine of correspondences. Almost all herbalism is based on the doctrine of correspondences. And that claims that everything on earth has a celestial rulership or a celestial correspondence, such as gold being ruled by the sun or dandelions being ruled by the sun and such like that. He doesn't even state that there is a correspondence between the plants and the different organs and systems in a human. This is a very different view of things. He makes just a simple, direct, linear statement that plants, herbs, and stones have virtues or qualities. He doesn't say any more than that. Moreover, each of these virtues is something good or something positive. He talks about poisons. He talks about virtues run amok becoming vices, but he doesn't categorically judge them or look down on them or be snide about them. Everything is good and everything is positive. Now that's really quite a statement. There's something very humble and something very humanistic in this, in looking at and saying that this can help a human in trouble. It doesn't immediately put it at the front porch of divinity. Divine correspondences would do that. It doesn't deny that there are correspondences. All it does is celebrate positive contributions. And of all of the Catholic orders, the Franciscans were by far the most positive. They took their keynote from St. Francis, who was almost always joyous, and his joy was so unbounding that you couldn't put him down. This section also says something that is germane to our topic of cause and consequence, and the polarity of cause and consequence. In lines 19 through 22, he very deftly describes the philosophy of healing that is common to the Rosicrucians and other schools. In effect, he says, if we stray from our purpose, we lose our balance, and we fall into extremism, and we abandon our innate qualities, and even our virtues can become vices. When that occurs, an herb, a plant, or a storm can help us to reestablish balance. He's not talking here about continuous medication. Continuous medication is a concept only of modern medicine. The idea of spiritual healing, as it has always been, is that if you get off balance, the healer lends you his or her will, and with that will, you're given the strength to get through something. An herb or any other healing property that you use is to establish the balance. Usually the balance has to do with something being hyper or hypo, either too fast or too slow, either too martial or too saturnine. And the herb gives you the balance, and then once you've got your balance, you're on your own again. So it's a very modern and it's a very healthy spiritual attitude toward medication. The whole philosophy that is propounded here is a balance or a homeostasis of complementary opposites. Anytime virtue can be turned into vice and vice into virtue, there's a delicate balance. It's so neat that he goes to show that this delicate balance is maintained right within the plants themselves. That the same plant can contain both poison and medicine. And even the way you apply the plant, whether it's by smelling or by consuming it, can mean the difference between life or death. Whether one will continue or get worse, or one will find salubrity from it. It's a really nice, it's in that little statement, it's really beautiful what he does. In line 22, he states something that is especially important to our theme. He states that vice can be turned to virtue by some actions. The principle of cause and consequence, which we are calling the law, is sometimes called the principle of action. That is its name in the Orient, where it is called karma. Without action, causes never become consequences. To some, that pristine state of never acting and producing consequences is considered idyllic. And evil is taking action. Better left undone is that philosophy. Of course, if that were the so, then all of creation would be blasphemous, and the universal spirit would be a perpetrator worse than the Gnostics saw the demiurge to be. So, like, the principle of action cannot be wrong. Others see action and the new experience that is born from it as a fruit, or as soul material refined from it. So that this is the basis of goodness, is action through experience where things become realized. Friar Lawrence seems to see it both ways, but he does tend to lean a little bit toward the value of action, even though he's a little conservative in that. The second speech of Friar Lawrence is also interesting. On the next page, between lines 32 and 42, if you read it, a lot of this you have to read alone by yourself to really appreciate it. And this is one of those speeches that you have to do. What he is doing is he is doing a direct thought-to-mouth activity. As he's looking over Romeo, when Romeo comes in, he's drawing conclusions. and each conclusion that he draws is immediately put forth, and then he hits it right on the head, and then Romeo tells him, yes, you're right. I have been up all night. Romeo's allusion to mutual wounding by enemies in love hints at a philosophy of love that is carried by many people. It goes all the way back to the Symposium of Plato-Socrates, talking about the separation of the sexes as beings actually being cut in half with a knife, and that we all have another half running around, and that the mutual wound being opened is a recognition of the other person in that same state. Shakespeare continues to portray the humanistic side of the Franciscans in line 65. He actually has the monk swear, and he has it swear by Jesus and Mary on top of that. That's quite a strong statement. And in line 67 and 68, for the third or fourth time, we have seen propounded in this same play the doctrine of the eye versus the doctrine of the heart. In this case, it's stated quite explicitly, and it's not quite such an implicit statement as some of the earlier varieties. In lines between 65 and 80, and the surprise that Friar Lawrence shows in that, I wonder whether that surprise is genuine or whether it's feigned. Because after all, Friar Lawrence is a wise old man. He's probably known Romeo since birth, and he's been Romeo's teacher and his intimate confidant. I doubt that you could really surprise him. In all of these capacities, he shouldn't be surprised, except perhaps to fake surprise. And he's faking surprise to shock Romeo, and maybe to check him out or to test him. It could be true surprise, and if it is, wasn't he that was surprised, but his belief system to which he had been attached was shocked or surprised. That I could believe. After all, he does show himself to be a pretty conservative person, and thinking of marriage as uniting, or love as uniting people forever and ever, and here Romeo passes from one to another without him even knowing about it, so his whole belief system could be shocked, but not he himself. It's interesting to note that when he does agree to do the marriage, he has something much bigger in mind. He wants to unite the people who are divided and in strife, and he sees something more than just a simple marriage. All right, Jerry, you're up. We'll read the next scene.
Where the devil should this Romeo be? Came he not home tonight?
Not to his father. I spoke with his man.
Why, that same still hard-hearted wench that Rosalind torments him so that he will show them that.
I'm out. The kinsman to old Capulet has sent a letter to his father's house.
A challenge and
Romeo will answer.
any man that can write may answer the letter.
Yea, he will answer the letter's master. How he dares, he dares.
Alas, poor Romeo, he is already dead, stabbed with a white wench's black eye, run through the ear with a love song, the very pin of his heart cleft with the blind boy-browed butt shaft, and he is a man to encounter. And is he a man to encounter Tybalt?
Why, what is Tybalt?
More than a prince of cats, or that he's courageous, or that he's the courageous captain of compliments. He He fights as you sing French song, keeps time, distance, proportion. He rests his minimum rests, 1, 2, and third in your bosom. The very butcher of the silk button, a duelist, a duelist. A gentleman of the very first house, of the very first and second cause. The immortal Posada, the Ponto Reversa, the hate. The what?
Also, such antics, listing, effective, fantastical, new tunes, new turns of accent. I issue a very good blade, a very tall man, a very good horse. Why is not this a lamentable thing, and sir, that we should be thus affected with these strange flies, these fashion mongers, these pardonimies, who stand so much on the new form that they cannot sit at ease on the old bench. Oh, their bones, their bones.
Here comes Romeo. Here comes Romeo.
Now you grow like fried herring. Oh, flesh, flesh, how art thou fleshified, fishified. Now is you for the umber past, Petrarch rode in, Laura to his lady, kitchen wench. Mary, she had better not to behind her. Ditto, a dowdy, Cleopatra, Egyptian, Helen and girl, Hilda and Harlem, Sidney, a gray eye or so, a knack to the crook. Signor Romeo, bonjour, is the French, so salutation to your French lot. You did us the counterfeit very last time.
Well, to you both. Counterfeit did I give you?
The slip, sir, the slip. Can you not receive?
Pardon, good Mercutio, my business was great, and in such a great case as mine, a man may strain courtesy.
That's as much as to say such a case as yours constrains a man to follow in the hand.
Meaning to courtesy?
Thou hast most kindly hit it. Most courteous disposition.
Nay, and the very prickness of courtesy. Art, the very pink of courtesy.
Pink for flowers.
Right.
Elia.
Why, then is my pump well flowered?
Sure, wit, follow me this jest now till thou hast worn out thy pump, that when the single soul is worn, the jest may remain after wearing solely singular.
Both single soiled just solely singular for the single.
He did pretty good with that.
In between us, good.
Then we'll,
Romeo, my wit faints.
Swifts and spurs, or I call it match.
My wits run the wild goose chase, and if thou hast more of the wild goose in one of thy wits, then I'm sure I have in my whole five. Was I with you there for the goose?
Well, it's never with me for anything when I was not there for the goose.
I would like you are the ear for that, yes.
Very good goose, right not.
Thy wit is a very bitter sweeting. It is a most sharp sauce.
and is it not then well served to a sweet goose?
Oh, here is a wit of pure Chevelle that stretches from an inch narrow to an ell broad.
I stretch it out for that word broad, which added to the goose proves thee far and wide a broad goose.
Why? Why is not this better now than grown for love? Now art thou sociable, now art thou Romeo, now art thou what thou art, by art as well as by nature. For this dribbling love is like a great natural that runs lolling up and down to hide his bauble in a hole.
Stop there, stop there.
And this last thing is stopping my tail against the hair.
I would tell the made thy tail large.
my tale, and you occupy the argument no longer.
Here's goodly here. A sail, a sail.
Two, a shirt and a smock.
Peter,
Huh? My friend Peter.
Good Peter, to hide her face or her pants, the fair face.
God, you good morrow, gentlemen.
God be good then. Very good then.
Is it good then?
Oh, just no less, I tell you, for the body hand of the dial is now on the trip of noon.
Out upon you, what a man you are.
one gentlewoman that God hath made himself mar.
By my troth, it is well said, for himself to mar. Oh, a gentleman, can any of you tell me where I may find the young Romeo? I can tell you, but young Romeo will be older when you have found him than he was when you sought him. I am the youngest of the name that called up adverse.
You say well.
Is the worst well? Very well. Look, in faith, wisely.
If you give me so many glance of confidence that he is.
We'll invite him to some supper.
Aboard, so ho.
What hast thou found?
No hair, sir, unless a hair, sir, left high. That is something stale and hoar, or it be spent.
You got the song to sing.
An old hair whore and an old bear whore is very good mention length, but a hair that is whore is too much for a score when it whores or it be spent. Romeo, will you come to your father's? We'll get dinner thither.
I will follow you. Farewell, ancient lady. Farewell, lady.
I pray you, sir, what saucy merchant was this that was so full of his grocery?
A gentleman, nurse, that loves to hear himself talk. He will speak more in a minute than he will stand to in a month.
And if it's anything to it, I'll take him back. And we'll up here and quite a soft chat. And if I cannot, I'll find those that shall. Early May, I am none of his short days. I am none of his game plays. And now I stand by to the summer every May to and his pleasure.
No man use you at his pleasure. I had my weapon to quickly have been out and warned you. There it was, soon as another man, the occasion in a good quarrel, and the law on my side.
Now, oh God, I'm so vexed at every part about his curvy knees. Pray you, sir, a word, and as I told you, my young lady bid me inquire you of. What she bid me say, I will keep to myself, but first let me tell you. If ye should lead her a fool's paradise, as they say, it were a very gross kind of behavior, as they say. For the gentlewoman is young, and therefore, if you should deal double with her, truly it were an ill thing to be offered to any gentlewoman, and very weak feeling.
Nurse, commend me to thy lady and mistress, I protest unto thee.
Good heart, and in faith I will tell her as much. Lord, she will be joyful woman.
What wilt thou tell her, nurse? Thou dost not mark me? I will tell her, sir, that you do protest this, as I take it, is a gentleman like offer.
Bid her device suddenly to come to a trip this afternoon, and there she shall at fire gone to sell, be shrivelled and married. Here's where thy fingers.
No, truly, sir, not a penny.
Won't you, I say you shall.
Afternoon, sir? Well, she shall be there.
And stay, good nurse, behind the abbey wall. Within this hour my man shall be with thee. wavy chords made like a tackled stair, which to the high top gallant of my joy must be my convoy in the secret night. Farewell, be trusty, and I'll quit thy pain. Farewell, commend me to thy mistress.
Now God in heaven bless thee. Hark you, sir.
What sayest thou, my dear nurse?
Is your man secret? Did you hear him say, "Two may keep counsel, putting one away"? Warn ye my man, lest he would speak.
Well, sir, my mistress is the sweetest lady. Lord, Lord, when 'twas a little passing thing, oh, there is a nobleman in town, one Paris, that would fain lay knife of sword. But she, good soul, had as see a toad, a very toad, as see him. I anger her sometimes to tell her that Paris is the proper man. But I warn you, when I say so, she looks as pale as any pout in the versal world. Does not Rosemary and Romeo begin with the letter?
Very nice. And what was that? Both with an R.
Master, that's the dog's name. R is for the, no, I know it begins with the same other letters. And she has the prettiest of it, but of you and Rosemary, that it would do you good to hear it.
Send me to thy lady.
Aye, 1,000 times. Peter?
Anon?
Before Mr. Ken of Pace.
Well, rest yourselves in your chairs. This is going to be a long and roundabout journey, but the roundabout is more important than the objective of the journey. It seems a good time to address a very large general issue through a specific case. It is also an exceedingly difficult case for us to deal with as much as the general issue is. What is difficult about it is difficult because of who we are and what we are. We are all spiritual idealists. Our aspiration to spirituality, to high ideals, has brought us to where we can intuitively see through and beyond the darkened materialism of the world around us. We can begin to sense and anticipate more ideal spiritual realms that are behind this. We sense that there's a great purpose and a great plan. We can intuit divine intent in every facet of the evolutionary creation. To some extent, we are inspired. And we try to live in accordance with divine intent and with the high spiritual principles. It isn't easy. As we go on, we find more sinful tendencies in ourselves than we would have dreamed possible in our worst nightmare. We succeed and we err. We move forward and we backslide. The further we progress and the longer we persist, the larger and more horrendously difficult the task of uniting with the Spirit seems to be. In spite of that, if we persist and do that in earnest, we do make incremental progress. slowly, very slowly, we get better. And the real progress is really satisfying. We grow up and we become better people very gradually. Not all of the resistance to progress is internal. A good deal of it is external. And the harder part is the external part. We have corrupt political institutions directed to selfish ends, with little, if any, attention at all to spiritual evolution or to higher principles. We have religious institutions that are occupied with sectarian issues, and they're often just as selfish as the political institutions. Almost all the institutions around us are darkened by materialism and misdirected by egoism. We're seeing that in our commercial institutions right now. Selfishness abounds, and it's even vaunted as a virtue by some. So it's difficult when spiritual idealists confront this, which is obviously counter to everything we intuit as being true. Some aspects are more difficult than others. For example, there is the collective aspect. It's relatively easy to accept individual responsibility for all of our deeds and the consequences and the circumstances that come out of them. Painful though it may be, we can accept responsibility for everything in our individual lives. It's much more difficult to accept responsibility for cultural deeds and cultural causes and consequences. When we encounter that, we want to say, I didn't participate in the perpetration of this. Why should I have to suffer the consequences with these other people? It's almost like in grade school, when you had to, the whole class was denied some kind of boon or privilege because of a few miscreants along the way. The fact of the matter is that the law, cause or consequence, karma, or whatever we want to call it, does apply collectively. That's one of the things that's so wondrous about it. That large masses of very disparate individuals should experience individually and collectively exactly which each one needs, or what each one has brought on. To try and conceive that intellectually is almost beyond comprehension, how perfectly it works. Somewhere, sometime, somehow, we have been part of the causes, either by our actions or by our inactions, by our thoughts, by our desires, or by our deeds, of all of our collective consequences, our collective circumstances. To deny this would be to deny the truth, cause and consequence, and the divine justice that is behind it, as well as the progress that comes out of it. To deny this would be to deny the universal spirit, which we, as humanity are one wave of. We're a collective spirit, a human one. To deny this is to deny the very task that we said that we would perform. Redemption of fallen humanity. We fell together by a common mismotivation, and now we have to accept that fallen state together and rise together. This is the reality. Or as those great Eastern bards said, I am the walrus. This is our holy work. Even if we accept culpability of our consequences and our collective causation, that is not the single most difficult obstacle to overcome. What seems more difficult is the fact that we are in this with people who don't care about it, and who don't want to work on it, and who don't want redemption. And even among those who are working towards salvation, there are many who are adamant in their persistence about misnotions or misactions. Makes a really impossible kind of situation. We cannot force a higher life or any of its principles or truths onto anyone, because to do so would be taking away their freedom, which would be to perpetrate a more heinous sin. Everyone wants freedom, and we're to help freedom, not to deny it. So what we have is a very daunting task. It is especially daunting for us because our gaze is transfixed on something higher. We tend to balk at the difficulty of it. It seems impossible to try to work with people and institutions that are so darkened in ignorance and so encumbered by materialism that they don't want to live by spiritual idealism, even if we could bring it before their attention. What we want to say, or at least what I want to say sometimes, if we could only wipe the slate clean and say, as the musicians say it, let's start from the top. It would be so much easier if we could start all over. It's almost as if we've taken a very impropitious route to get to somewhere, and now we find ourselves in a quagmire with quicksand and everything else, and we long to go back and take a different route. The truth is that we can't go back. Experience is irreversible. Events act as valves that make back-rushing impossible. We and the world are changed by our deeds. We can't go back. We have initiated causes and collective bundles of causes and chains of causes and nets of causes in every facet of the ongoing stream of life. It's not like there's some kind of evolutionary or destiny birth control that we can institute causes for the pleasure of them without the consequences or the fruits coming out of them. we can, individually and collectively, change the new causes. But how we do that is a very big and a very difficult question. In our individual lives as spiritual aspirants, we try to do that by attaining to the life of the Spirit, by living by spiritual truths, and all of the spiritual powers and faculties that come with that, so that we can really be effective. But even this very means is another form of temptation, an alternative temptation. Because if we're not purged of our selfishness and our other sins, they will also permeate our new lives, where they will have much greater scope with much greater powers. Consequently, some spiritual aspirants tend to say to themselves, why should I suffer this misery when the door is open to escape? Of course, this ignores the reality that we are the walrus, that in full spirit we are as much those who are suffering in blind ignorance as we are those who are apotheosized. With our spiritual abilities, we may be able to ignore their suffering and our suffering for perhaps many millennia. And we can focus on bliss. But we can't do so eternally. Eternity is what it's all about. Sooner or later, we have to accept our humanity as part of our spirituality. Or else we will have only pseudo-spirituality, which will be empty. When we do so, our work in the world can be a joy. But when we do so, we encounter another thing that is anathema to many spiritual aspirants. And that is compromise. If we are proud and if we are self-righteous, I tend to be that way, we disdain compromise. I won't compromise my values. Consequently, we get nowhere. We're stymied. We isolate ourselves in a standoff with the world. If we're insecure, we're afraid of compromise. We feel that if we compromise one thing, everything's going to go down the toilet. After all, we're dealing with the devil. That kind of thought comes to our mind when we're insecure. Compromising love or compromising divine principle is one thing. It's a thing never to be done. But that's not what's always at stake, even though we protest and say it is. Usually it is what we have identified with, or that we are selfishly loath to part with, that is at stake in compromise. Creative compromise is not a mitigation between two evils, as some people think. Jimmy Carter, a Libra, and one of the best compromisers around, tells us that there can be no true compromise unless all parties feel they are getting something good out of the deal. Preferably that they got the best of the deal. A creative compromise, everybody feels like they've gotten the best. The compromise we're thinking of is not merely a compromise between the desires of two or more parties. Well, that's sometimes in the mix. It is creative compromise between the reality of things and the potentiality. In creative compromise, every effort is made to not focus on adversarial parties, because that only polarizes, and that gives all parties an object to hold in enmity, to be polarized against. The idea is to find something within or common to both parties that is germane to the issue and that is valuable to all parties, and draw attention to it, and let that be the prize, and to grow in that direction irrespective of where each begins. Now, granted, this is very difficult in places like Northern Ireland or Palestine or Yugoslavia or Rwanda, where people have demonized each other for centuries and have raised their children to see adversaries as demons. It's very hard to distract the attention away from that kind of polarization. Visible alternatives may not contain the answer. We are mystics, and mystics look for inner things. We look for root principles. We look for the hidden thing that we can creatively use to get beyond the appearances of enemies. The compromise that we're talking about is not a compromise in the feud between the Capulets and the Montagues. That will unfold according to the same principle later in the play. Instead, the compromise that we're talking about concerns one aspect of the issue at the root of our cosmic detour into materialism, which is called the fall of humanity. According to the seers, who have carefully observed and cross-checked their findings, humanity fell by jumping the gun or taking control of our share of the creative power, the divine creative power that was allotted to us. We took control of it before we knew how to procreate in harmony with the cosmos, and as a consequence, we have produced unhealthy, unharmonious bodies and a myriad of other selfishnesses, because it was selfishness that we wanted the power for ourselves. Our selfishness was tempted by the promise of immortality, by being able to create new bodies at will. It was not a single error. It wasn't one time, boom, and we fell. It's something that was repeated many times. Our selfishness was turned from the idea of immortality through procreation toward pleasure in the expression of the sex function. Many, many, many replications of that deed has turned the direction of the creative energy downward and outward. So much so that it has become almost the habitual flow of the divine energy. The eventual consequence of many, many, many years has been hardening. Satisfying our desire always hardens us, and it's closed us off from inner things so that we look outward for pleasure. We want our satisfaction. Since we are part of the creators and not just mere creatures, our actions have actually hardened the earth so that we have a much harder and much more dense and difficult field of activity to work through. The question for us is, how do we redeem ourselves? How do we redeem humanity? And how do we redeem the earth from all of this hardening? Some spiritual philosophers have balked at the issue and have dissociated. That is, they have seen the truth about the sexual function and have developed the self-control and have abstained completely. Others have seen the same cosmic facts and have developed the same self-control, but have used the sexual energy sparingly to provide healthy bodies and lofty environments so that little by little finer human beings can come in and inchmeal solve the problem. Now this is all very fine for individuals. We've been talking about collective destiny. How do we deal with people who don't know or who don't believe or who don't care about the cosmic fact of the potency of the creative energy that's allotted to us or that we take for ourselves? They don't care about redirecting it. How do we deal with them? It's another seemingly impossible task to know how to deal with. There have been all sorts of different means that have been tried. In about the time that this play is supposed to take place, Savonarola tried to put strict celibacy on the masses of Florence in Renaissance Italy, the same Renaissance Italy of Machiavelli. He was successful for 3 years. He had the entire city of Florence living ascetically until the uprising that ended with him being burned at the stake. 16th century, maybe even a little earlier. There is a painting by Raphael of Savonarola, which is alarming because it looks almost identical to me. Which is... other attempts at repression have had equally disastrous consequences. The Catholic Church in the United States right now is reeling from the backlash of repression by people living celibate lives that don't know how to do it and that haven't been prepared for it. The creative power is not to be denied. Others have tried to ignore it. They've tried to sweep it under the rug. only to have it bulge out somewhere else in very strange manifestations. Still others have gone a different direction. They have urged unlimited sexual expression as good. The result has been to produce people who are morally and emotionally hardened. Gratification always does that. Moreover, it hasn't stanched the desire. It has actually wetted it. It's almost like a sieve that the more you use it, the bigger the holes become. The long-term consequences of this are even more gruesome, such as lowered intelligence and an inability to direct the spinal fire upward at all to the brain. Fortunately, most people are moderate in their expression. But the studies show that even if they are physically moderate, they are not so in thought and desire. I think that the studies claim that American males think about sex once every 7 seconds or something like that. The mystery schools have taken a different approach, an approach that is creative compromise. The mystery schools know and hold the creative power as sacred. And even candidates, lesser candidates like myself, try to live abstemious lives. But the mystery schools have always known that sex does occupy the attention of others. They didn't ignore that fact, and they don't condemn it. Instead, they creatively compromised. They realized that denial is ineffective. They also realized that deep within, the spirit understands its errors, and that the spirit is struggling as valiantly, and probably more so, than the people who would help this purification and raising. The creative compromise used by the mystery schools is a compromise that is common to them, and that is to address the sexual issue head-on in its own arena using the principles behind it. However, instead of encouraging sex, it diverts the creative energy upward to the other creative center, the brain and the larynx. When this is done, it can relieve tension and insecurity. As we have mentioned in the past several occasions, that humor releases tension and insecurity. So we're finally at the objective, and that is that we're talking, that I told you, the objective wasn't as important as the whole thing that we experienced.
I didn't know why, after what we read, we were getting this talk. And now I'm controlling myself and saying, what does this have to do with what?
We're talking about sexual humor. In the myth of Demeter, which was the myth behind the Eleusinian mysteries, and in the myth of Isis, Osiris, and Horus, which was the mystery myth behind the Isisaic mysteries, sexual humor is part of the story. Even candidates to mystery schools were given sexual humor to relieve their tension. There's a lot of tension when you tried to live an abstemious life. Apparently Shakespeare was of this mind because many plays have sexual humor in them. For example, even in the very serious sections of Hamlet, there are sexual double entendres in other kinds of sexual humor. This play, we haven't made a point of it, but this play is loaded with it. In some ways, this is pretty smutty. The scene we just read has all kinds of sexual allusions about it. Prostitutes as geese and everything else, and whore, rhyming with whores and everything. Yes.
Actually, there was a comment that the theater was always considered bawdy in those days because I think what went on as theater before Shakespeare was mostly
Melodrama
and bawdy, and that he had to give him hit that same spot, but give it with a more natural ring.
Yes. Yep.
So I think it was the foundation of theater has the reputation that it's given.
Now this is not to say that because this philosophy is used, that all sexual humor is regenerative, because that would certainly be false. There is some sexual humor that is debasing and degrading to those born in feminine bodies. There is some sexual humor that lowers our consciousness to very base, filthy, murky realms of consciousness. How do we know the difference? And what do we apply to reach the end of using sexual humor as a way to distract from sexuality? There are several ways that one can tell, but probably the best of them can be said in one word: wit. When the consciousness is redirected upward, there is a real keen appreciation of wit, because the charge of sexuality becomes the zing of humor, or the zing of wit. If you look at all the innuendos in almost all of Shakespeare, there isn't a trace of arousal. It's not like pornography that gets you absorbed. And it's all loaded with wit. So wit is a pretty good test. Another thing about this is, whether they be mere rhymes or whether they be several meanings of the same word, sexual humor involves a lot of double and triple entendres. Most of sexual humor uses things that can be seen two ways. And so it's not only a matter of getting people to appreciate wit, it's a matter of being able to get people to see things on two levels. For somebody who's stuck in sensualistic materialism, that's a step upward. Now this is only a stopgap creative compromise for the period that we're in now. It'll be outdated some way, but it is a valuable stopgap for people who are sexually preoccupied. It gets them to turn their attention to the mind. And if you're around people who tell a lot of sexual jokes, it almost becomes like a contest to see who can have the more witty, or who can have the more strong a thought behind their joke. So it's a valuable compromise. And that brings us to one other topic that we have to appreciate before it leaves us, and that is Mercutio. He's delightful, he's sparkling, he's refreshing. In some ways, if you look at the speeches and the talks, he's more interesting than Romeo. Romeo is sort of mouthing self-discoveries as he falls in love. He's under the swoon of love, and he speaks in an unconscious kind of poetry. But he seems something of a sleepwalker in all of it. Mercutio is really well named. He's a mercurial character. He's witty and he's clever and he has a lot to say. And he loves the sport of the mind. He complains about it with Romeo, that Romeo has converted to a soppy life of romance, that he is just terrible romance and that it doesn't have any joy to it. Yeah, he's not terribly deep. And what he lacks in depth, he has in variety. He has all of the mercurial versatility, and he's verbalization, Mercury verbalization incarnate. He's a perfect example of our thesis on the place of humor in regeneration. I don't know, probably, I would guess. On page 50, between lines 92 and 97, he celebrates the philosophy of the life of the mind over the life of the emotions. This is a great thing to him. And even Juliet's nurse, who's sort of a bawd herself and has a little bit more lowbrow humor, she's taken aback by him. When he's around, she becomes very conservative and even takes the front. And she can't put her own turn on words until Mercutio is gone. He's a delight, a fun kind of person. All right, let's read scene 5. I think Jerry is up.
The clock struck 9 when I did send the nurse. In half an hour she promised to return. Perchance she cannot meet him. That's not so. Well, she is lame. Love heralds should be thoughts, which 10 times faster glides than the sun's beams, driving back shadows over the lowering hills. Therefore do nimble pinioned doves draw love, and therefore hath the winged swift Cupid wings. Now is the sun upon the hindmost hill of the day's journey, and from 9 till 12, in 3 long hours, yet she is not come. Yet she affections and warm youthful blood, she would be as swift in motion as a ball. My words would bandy her, my sweet love, and his to me. But old folks may feign as they were dead, unruly, slow, heavy and pale as lead. Oh God, she comes. Oh, honey nurse, what news? Hast thou met him? Send thy man away. Peter, stay at the gate.
Now, good sweet nurse, O Lord, why lookest thou sad? Though news be sad, yet tell them merrily. If good, thou shamest the music of sweet news, by playing it to me with so sour a face.
I am aweary. Give me leave a while. Ay, how my bones ache. What a chance have I.
Wouldst thou ask my bones, and I am thy news. Nay, come, I pray thee, speak. Good nurse, speak.
Just a little haste, and do not stay a while. That I am out of
The excuse that thou dost make in this delay is longer than the tale that thou dost excuse. Thy news good or bad, answer to that. Say either, and I'll stay the circumstance. Let me be satisfied. Is it good or bad?
Well, you have made a simple choice. You know not how to choose a man. Romeo? No, not he. Though his face be better than any man's, yet his leg excels all men's, and for a hand and a foot and a body, though they be not to be talked on, yet they are past compare. He is not the flower of courtesy, but I'll warrant him as gentle as a lamb. Go thy ways, wench, serve God. What have you dined at home?
No, but all this did I know before. What says he of our marriage? What of that?
Lord, how my head aches. What a head have I. It beats as it would fall in 20 pieces. My back is out, other side, and all my back. Beshrew your heart for sending me about to catch my death, with the tossing up and down.
Hi, Faith. I'm sorry that thou art not well. Sweet nurse, tell me what says my love.
Your love says, like an honest gentleman, and a courteous and a kind, and a handsome, and I, born the virtuous. Where is your mother?
Where is my mother? Why, she is within. Where should she be? How oddly thou repliest. Your love says, like an honest gentleman. Where is your mother?
O God's lady dear, are you so hot? Mary, come out, I trow. Is this a poultice for my aching bones? Henceforth do your messages yourself.
There's such a coil. Come, what says Romeo?
Then hie you hence to Friar Lawrence's cell. There stays a husband to make you a wife. Now comes the wanton blood up in your cheeks. They'll be in scarlet straight at any news. Hie you to church. I must another way to fetch a ladder, by which your love must climb a bird's nest soon when it is dark. I'm the drudge and toil in your delight, but you shall bear the burden soon at night. Go, out to dinner. Hie you to the cell.
High to high fortune, honest nurse, farewell. Obviously, Juliet shows exactly how old she is in this scene. She's impatient in the way a child is impatient. Nothing can deter a child's impatience. Love is patient, and she's in love, but she also has the desire of youth, and desire is not patient. Desire wants what it wants, and it wants it now. She's obviously intelligent. She knows that thought is faster than the speed of light, which is the first time I've seen that in Shakespeare anywhere. And she makes nice allusions to myth and has good observations to make about age. But she has youthful impatience. Her mind is quite sharp. She can see through all of the things, nurses' excuses, but her mind is serving the desire. The nurse, on the other hand, plays her like a fish. Anything but give her her heart's desire. She laments her aches. She says good things about Romeo, but not the things that Juliet wants. She extols his virtues, but gives no news. It's interesting to speculate on. Perhaps she's protectively testing her to see if her feelings are true. Perhaps, being somewhat bodily inclined herself, she's whetting her desire and vicariously living through her. Perhaps she's jealous and is teasing spitefully. But surely she's having a good time playing with Juliet. Let's read the last scene in this act, and let's see. I think Jerry Weesey is up.
Smile the heavens upon this holy act, that after hours
Amen, amen. But come what sorrow can, it cannot countervail the exchange of joy that one short minute gives me and her sight. Do thou but close our hands with holy words, then love-devouring death do what he dare. It is enough. I may but call her mine.
Violent delights and violent ends, and in the triumph die like fire and powder, which as the kiss console. The sweetest honey is loathsome in its own deliciousness, and in the taste confounds the appetite. Therefore love moderate. Long love doth so. Too swift arrives the tardy as too swift. Oh, here comes the lady, oh, so light of foot, will never wear out the everlasting flame. A lover may be strife and gossamers, the gossamers, that idles in the wanton summer air, and yet not fall, so light in vanity.
Good, even to my ghostly confessor.
Romeo shall think thee, daughter, for a spoke.
As much to him, else is his thanks too much.
Ah, Juliet, it's a matter of fact, Lord, you keep quite mine, and that I still be more pleasant than speaking of that breath with neighbor air, and let rich music pop and hold the happy happiness that holds the things new love is still captive.
Seems more rich in matter than in words, right? Than in substance, not ornament. They are but beggars that can count their worth. My true love is known to such excess, and some of half my heart.
Come with me, and you shall make short work. All by your means you shall not stay alone. The Holy Church incorporates truth in one.
Quite a contrast between this scene and the last, where the last one was antsy and impatient. This one has qualities almost of eternity about them. Romeo, in his first speech, is seeking eternal joy. He can see nothing else. Both his love and desire fix themselves on objects, and they will seek nothing else. He can't see anything else. He doesn't even fear death. Love is like that. Love in its fulfillment, he's seeing it almost like a neutralization or an annihilation. An annihilation in the moment, and that moment is eternal. Friar Lawrence agrees, but sees another side to it. He's again the herbalist, speaking out for balancing and keeping things closer to neutral. Again, like the herbalist, he sees dangers in extremities. In personal things, extremities are always our bane. And in the last speeches of Romeo and Juliet, there is another hint of eternity. It isn't really strong, but it is a technique that is used in a lot of mystic poetry. And that is the technique of not stating something, stating what it isn't. Both Romeo and Juliet allude to having great love, but they don't say what it is, because if they did so, they would encompass it, and being encompassed, it would be small. And so it's an excellent way to talk about a true love, to say that it's there, and to not say what it is. That's about as far as we're going to go tonight. Next time we'll try to get the whole Act 3 in, which has a lot of bravado, but what? I don't know. It doesn't have as much substance.